Hello, my friends, and welcome to another episode in the great books of philosophy. In this episode, we're looking at The Republic by Plato. This is a really important book in Western philosophy. I know you get this a lot with ancient philosophies. Many of these works go on to inspire entire religions or schools of thought, but Plato is perhaps the most brilliant example of this. In 1997, British philosopher and mathematician Alfred North Whitehead famously wrote, "The safest general characterization of the European philosophical tradition is that it consists of a series of footnotes to Plato." It is certainly true that Plato is probably the most influential and famous Western philosopher. And of his corpus of work, The Republic is perhaps his magnum opus. It's certainly the most well-known and well-read. So, what is The Republic all about? In this video, I'm going to give a general overview of the text, and then I'm going to provide a deeper dive on 5 key ideas from the text. First of all, I think it's important to point out The Republic is written as a dialogue. The majority of Plato's work is written like this. In his dialogues, Plato uses the question and answer technique to probe at propositions and test implications. Plato would typically use Socrates as his mouthpiece. Scholars generally assume the views espoused by Socrates represent Plato's own, and this makes it hard to know anything about the real Socrates since he didn't write anything down, or if he did, none of it survives to this day. All we have is Plato's Socrates, which is really probably Plato himself. Plato's tendency to write in dialogues using Socrates as his mouthpiece has led to the dialogues being referred to as Socratic dialogues, and his question and answer method of inquiry being referred to as the Socratic method. This style of writing can seem pedantic to some readers, but I actually really like it. In fact, I vividly remember reading this text as an 18-year-old undergrad philosophy student and feeling incredibly satisfied with the rigor and logical completeness of this method. This was when I was really first captured by philosophy, and the rest is history. The Republic has 2 main questions. What is justice? And what is the connection between justice and eudaimonia, my favourite word, or human flourishing? Given these 2 questions, The Republic is really an ethical and political philosophy treatise. To address these inquiries, Socrates leads the dialogue through the topics of defining justice, the ideal state, the human soul, the importance of reason, the role of philosophers, and a theory of knowledge to boot. So it's a pretty broad scope. Let's chunk this up and dive in further to some of these topics. Plato's theory of justice really spans across most of the dialogue. In general, most people consider The Republic to be a treatise on justice, which it is, but before I grant that, I just want to make a few remarks on the translation of the word justice itself. The ancient Greek word Plato uses is dikaiosune. Dikaiosune derives from the word dikaios, which is the virtue of doing what is right or fair. Therefore, dikaiosune has strong connotations of what we would call righteousness or fairness. In the narrow sense, when applied to an individual, the word used is dikaioson, which means a person's virtue of fairness and righteousness. Now, this confuses the translation slightly since we never speak of a person's justice. Justice is not a character trait per se, but dikaiosune was. In English, justice is strongly associated with the judiciary or criminal law. If Plato was talking about justice at all, he meant it in the sense of a just person or a just state. This is kind of unconventional by common speak, so by justice, I tend to understand he means having a just character or moral righteousness and fairness. So what does Plato actually say about justice? The characters of the Republic offer several definitions of justice. In Book 2, Thrasymachus argues that justice is the advantage of the stronger. He contends that rulers define what justice is merely to serve their own interests. Cephalus claims justice is honesty in keeping one's promises. Polemachus expands on this by claiming that justice is giving each person what they are owed, which includes helping friends and harming enemies. It's pretty clear that Plato views these accounts as straw men, designed merely to provoke critical thinking. In the following books 2 to 4, Socrates reduces all these views to absurdity before asserting his own. This is a technique known as reductio ad absurdum in philosophy. He claims that justice is a virtue of both the individual soul and the state. he provides a separate but corresponding account of justice for each. In the case of the individual, justice occurs when each part of the soul performs its proper function harmoniously. Correspondingly, in the ideal state, justice occurs when each class of citizen performs their designated roles according to their natural abilities. This account has led scholars to dub Plato's theory of justice as harmony, since Plato claims justice is most simply expressed as each part of the soul and the state performing its proper function. So what are the parts of the soul and the state? Plato divides the human soul into three parts: logos, or reason, thumos, or spirit, and epithuma, or appetite. This division of three has led to the term the tripartite soul. Reason is the rational part of the soul, associated with thinking and making decisions based on logic and wisdom. Reason is the highest and noblest part of the soul in Plato's view, and it seeks truth, knowledge, and the pursuit of what is good and just. Spirit is associated with courage, ambition, honor, and a sense of indignation or anger when faced with injustice or disrespect. It is the source of a person's assertiveness and willingness to stand up for their beliefs and values. Appetite is linked to desires, bodily needs, and pleasures. It encompasses the pursuit of physical and material gratification, including food, drink, sex, and other forms of sensory satisfaction. This part of the soul is often driven by the immediate gratification, and it lacks self-control. Notice the intriguing similarity with Sigmund Freud's account of the human psyche. Freud also considered the psyche to consist of three separate elements: the id, the ego, and the superego. I think the temptation to divide human nature into different layers is very common. Plato argues the ideal state would be divided into three distinct classes of citizens. First you have the guardians, which is then split into two classes: the rulers and the auxiliaries, and then you have the producers. Each class would have a specific role based on their natural tendencies and abilities. The rulers, or philosopher-kings, are the best of the guardians and the highest class in the ideal state. They are individuals who possess exceptional reason, wisdom, and knowledge. Rulers are chosen and trained from early childhood, and their primary responsibility is to govern the state. Their sole aim is pursuing the common good rather than personal gain. The auxiliaries are guardians of the warrior class, and they're responsible for the defense of the state. They're trained in physical and military skills and are expected to protect the state from external threats and maintain internal order. The auxiliaries are guided by the wisdom and direction of the rulers. Their role is to ensure the safety and security of the state. Lastly, the producers. The producers make up the largest class of citizen in the ideal state. They engage in various forms of productive labour, such as farming, craftsmanship, trade, and other economic activities. Their role is to meet the material needs of society by producing goods and providing services. While their work is essential, they do not participate in the governance of the state. To realise this state, Socrates admits the need to convince the citizens to accept the social order and justify it. To do this, he introduces the idea of the noble lie, the so-called myth of metals. The myth portrays each human being as having a precious metal in them. Those suited to be rulers have gold, those suited to be auxiliaries have silver, and those suited to be producers have bronze. Plato's division of citizens into classes is clearly hierarchical and has been subject to pretty ruthless criticism by later philosophers. Plato himself uses the characters of the Republic to consider some, I think, valid objections. Demotus expresses concerns about the potential for corruption among the guardians. He questions whether these rulers who possess so much power and authority can resist the temptation of wealth and status and personal gain. He worries that the pursuit of the common good may be undermined by the flaws and weaknesses of human nature. So how does Plato propose to ensure the guardians remain uncorrupted? Plato suggests that from a young age, potential guardians are identified and separated from their families. This separation is intended to eliminate familial attachments and instill a strong sense of loyalty to the state. From there, the guardians would undergo rigorous physical training to develop strength, endurance, and courage. Physical fitness would be essential for their role as protectors of the state. Musical and poetry education, but only those that promote moral and virtuous ideals. Plato advocates for the censorship of content that could lead to immoral behavior. The purpose of music and poetry is to cultivate the right moral disposition and emotional responses. Philosophical education, including the study of mathematics, astronomy, and dialectics, the art of philosophical discussion. The study of mathematics in particular is meant to train their minds in abstract reasoning and critical thinking. As they progress through their education, some guardians would display exceptional qualities and abilities. These individuals are further groomed for leadership roles. From here, the most excellent of the guardians would be selected to become rulers or philosopher-kings. Philosopher-kings would need to excel in the aforementioned curriculum, but in particular, they must possess an exceptional grasp of the theory of forms, Plato's term for the highest reality. This reality is a transcendental realm of eternal and perfect abstract entities that Plato calls forms, which is sometimes translated as ideas. These are the true objects of knowledge. I have to admit though, the way that I just explained that to you admits an imaginary sense of clarity and definiteness to the theory which is not to be found in the Republic, nor any of Plato's extant writings. This account of them has no doubt been formed by scholars and their attempts to formalize and concretize Plato's ideas. So, to be fair to Plato, let's conclude this video by taking a look at one of the most well-known ways Plato actually describes the theory of forms, the Allegory of the Cave. Instead of explaining the Allegory of the Cave, I'm just going to let Plato do it in his own words. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the dialogue.
Picture men dwelling in a sort of subterranean cavern, with a long entrance open to the light on its entire width. Conceive them as having their legs and necks fettered from childhood, so that they remain in the same spot, able to look forward only, and prevented by the fetters from turning their heads. Picture further the light from a fire burning higher up at a distance behind them, and between the fire and the prisoners and above them a road which a long wall has been built, as the exhibitors of a puppet show have partitions before the men themselves, above which they show the puppets. All that I see. See also then men carrying past the wall implements of all kinds that rise above the wall, and human images and shapes of animals as well, wrought in stone and wood and every material. Some of these bearers presumably speaking, and others silent. A strange image you speak of, and strange prisoners. To us, perhaps. Tell me, do you think that these men would have seen anything of themselves or of one another, except the shadows cast from the fire on the wall of the cave that fronted them? How could they, if they were compelled to hold their heads unmoved through life? And again, would not the same be true of the objects carried past them? Surely, if then they were able to talk to one another, do you not think that they would suppose that in naming the things that they saw, they were naming the passing objects? Necessarily. And if their prison had an echo from the wall opposite them when one of the passerby uttered a sound, do you think that they would suppose anything else than the passing shadow to be the speaker? By Zeus, I do not. Then, in every way, such prisoners would deem reality to be nothing else than the shadows of the artificial objects. Quite inevitably. Consider, then, what would be the manner of release and healing from these bonds, and this folly, if in the course of nature something of this sort should happen to them, when one was freed from his fetters and compelled to stand up suddenly and turn his head around and walk and to lift up his eyes to the light, and in doing all this felt pain, and because of the dazzle and glitter of the light was unable to discern the objects whose shadows he formerly saw. What do you suppose would be his answer if someone told him that what he had seen before was all a cheat and an illusion, but that now, being nearer to reality and turned toward more real things, he saw more truly. And if also one should point out to him each of the passing objects and constrain him by questions to say what it is, do you not think that he would be at a loss, and that he would regard what he formerly saw as more real than the things now pointed out to him? Far more real. And if he were compelled to look at the light itself, would that not pain his eyes? And would he not turn away and flee to those things which he is able to discern and regard them as more clear and exact than the objects pointed out? It is so. And if someone should drag him thence by force up the ascent which is rough and steep, and not let him go before he had drawn him out into the light of the sun, do you not think that he would find it painful to be so hauled along, and would chafe at it, and when he came out into the light that his eyes would be filled with its beam, so that he would not be able to see even one of the things that we call real? Why, no, not immediately. Then there would be need of habituation, I take it, to enable him to see things higher up. And at first he would most easily discern the shadows. After that, the likeness or reflections in water of men and other things, and later the things themselves. And from these he would go on to contemplate the appearances in the heavens and heaven itself, more easily by night, looking at the light of the stars and the moon, than by day, the sun and the sun's light, of course. And so, finally, I suppose, he would be able to look upon the sun itself and see its true nature, not by reflections in water or phantasms of it in an alien setting, but in and by itself in its own place, necessarily. And at this point he would infer and conclude that this it is that provides the seasons and the courses of the year, and presides over all things in the visible region, and is in some sort the cause of all these things that they had seen. Obviously, that would be the next step. Well then, if he recalled to mind his first habituation and what passed for wisdom there, and his fellow bondsmen, do you not think that he would count himself happy in the change, and pity them? He would indeed. And if there had been honours and commendations among them which they bestowed on one another, and prizes for the man who is quickest to make out the shadows as they pass, and best able to remember their customary precedents, sequences, and coexistence, and so most successful in guessing at what was to come, do you think that he would be very keen about such rewards? And that he would envy and emulate those who were honoured by these prisoners, and lauded it among them? Or that he would feel with Homer, and greatly prefer, while living on earth, to be serf of another, a landless man, and endure anything rather than opine with them and live that life? Yes, I think that he would choose to endure anything rather than such a life. And consider this also. If such a one should go down again and take his old place, would he not get his eyes full of darkness, thus suddenly coming out of the sunlight? He would indeed. Now, if he should be required to contend with these perpetual prisoners in evaluating these shadows while his vision was still dim and before his eyes were accustomed to the dark, and this time required for habituation would not be very short, would he not provoke laughter? And would it not be said of him that he had returned from his journey aloft with his eyes ruined, and that it was not worth while to even attempt the ascent? And if it were possible to lay hands on and to kill the man who tried to release them and lead them up, would they not kill him? They certainly would.
If this sounds familiar, that's because the Wachowskis made a little-known film in 1999 called The Matrix that I think really nails the essence of the allegory with a sci-fi and cyberpunk sort of coat of paint. Plato is really telling us a lot here. Plato believes in a distinction between the world of appearances, the shadows on the cave wall, and the world of reality, the external world illuminated by the sun. It highlights his view that the physical world is imperfect and deceptive, while the world of forms represents true reality. Plato is making a point about how humans come to know the truth. The claim is that true knowledge is not derived solely from sensory perception, but requires intellectual insight and philosophical contemplation, the allegory really underscores the importance of the philosopher to escape the confines of the cave and gain knowledge of the forms. Philosophers are then tasked with returning to the cave to enlighten others, which is why Plato thought that philosophers should be kings. Guys, thank you so much for watching. I gotta admit, this is a really challenging text and there's a lot there. I'd really encourage you to read the Republic though. I think it's fun to see the foundation of the philosophical method emerge in a text like this, and knowing that it went on to form the basis of an entire discipline, basically. If you'd like to pick up a copy, head over to my website where you can get yourself an ebook version. Alternatively, you can grab a copy on Amazon. If you enjoyed the video, give it a like, leave a comment, and consider subscribing if you haven't already. Have a lovely day, my friends.